Good morning and welcome to Geography Rocks. This is revision lesson 1 on natural hazards. Be aware in an exam that a 1 marker question at the start might be just to ask you to describe what a natural hazard is. Have something on a revision card ready to answer such a question. A natural hazard is a sudden severe event which disrupts human life, which has economic and social impact. Whilst revising different types of natural hazards, try to complete a table like this one with examples of natural hazards. Try to group them as atmospheric, geological and flooding. Pause the video for 2 minutes and have a go at completing a table like this. Once complete, your table should look a little bit like this. So in the atmospheric category, we've got droughts, tornadoes, lightning, heat waves, blizzards and wildfire. Geological, we've got earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, landslides, sinkholes. Flooding, we've got glacial bursts and storm surges. Well done if you've got some of those in the right places. We might be asked to explain how certain factors affect risk. For example, urbanisation, poverty, farming or climate change. Try to pick one that you feel most confident with. For example, urbanisation. Urbanisation is going to have a large impact on flooding because the land will be tarmacked and therefore impermeable and water won't be able to infiltrate. There will also be less trees and therefore less interception. Always try to shoehorn in keywords such as infiltration and interception to show your geography writing and your geography language. Poverty is an important factor which has a great impact on the risk of natural disasters. If a country is poor, then it's going to be hard for it to get back on its feet after an earthquake, tornado or whatever. Equally, at the time of a natural disaster, poorer countries are going to suffer because they haven't got the infrastructure in place to help support people. Take a look at these diagrams. They show different types of plate boundaries. Just pause the video now and see if you can name the different types of plate boundary. From the left, we've got a constructive margin. The plates are pulling apart and the magma is rising to the surface. This is how volcanoes originally form. New land is being constructed. In the second diagram, we've got a destructive margin and you can see one plate pushing underneath of another. Here we're going to not only get the formation of volcanoes and volcanic activity, but also seismic activity, which can lead to earthquakes. In our final diagram, we've got what we call a conservative plate boundary. 2 plates rubbing in opposite directions, causing friction and eventually causing an earthquake. Pause the video just for a couple of minutes and try to draw some simple sketches. Add any annotations you can to describe the plate boundaries. In any exam paper, expect to see a world map and then a map showing perhaps a continent or a specific area. So this map here, we've got 2 things. On the right, we've got a world map. Always say to yourself, what's the examiner given me? So let's take a look of the world map. We've been given the equator, we've been given the Tropic of Capricorn. We can see South America and we can see that Chile has been highlighted in red on the western side of South America. So the first part of my response would say, Chile is located on the western side of South America. If I look now to the map on my left, I can see Chile is just south of the Tropic of Capricorn. It is on the western side of South America and it faces out to the South Pacific Ocean. Chile, as we know, suffered from an earthquake. Let's take a look at the numbers here. We've got number 38, 30, 800,000, 8.8, 500 and 12,000. The earthquake in Chile struck in 2010. Are you able to match these numbers with the questions beneath? Let's take a look. Question 1. The position of Chile with regards to GDP out of 193 countries. The magnitude of the earthquake, how many people died, the number of people injured, how many people were affected, the amount in US billions of damage. Pause the video and try to match those numbers with those questions. So your answer should be, Chile is an HIC, a high income country. It's number 38 out of 193 with regards to GDP, gross domestic product. The 2010 earthquake was 8.8 on the Richter scale, and sadly 500 people died. 12,000 people were injured and 800,000 people were affected. It's estimated that it cost $30 billion in damage. Try to learn and remember some of these bits of data. They make your own knowledge seem more secure and they will impress an examiner. Okay, so let's move on. You're likely to be asked, what had the greater impact? Was it primary effects or secondary effects? Draw a table like the one on the screen and try to put the information in the right boxes. Pause the video for 3 minutes whilst you do that. Okay, so let's take a look at the responses that you should have. There were a number of primary effects of the Chilean earthquake. Firstly, 12,000 people were injured, 800,000 were affected. There was damage to buildings and infrastructure, roads, railways. Power and communications was cut and 500 people were killed. There were also many secondary effects. Coastal towns were devastated by a tsunami. A chemical plant fire led to evacuations, and communities were cut off for a period of time by landslides. Take a look at this table and start thinking about whether you think primary or secondary effects had a greater impact. We're shifting our concentration now to the Nepalese earthquake in 2015. On the right hand side, you've got some numbers. Can you work out what the questions might be? The first number is 2015. The second one is 109th, 7.9, 9,000, 20,000, $5 billion, and finally the number 19. Pause if need be whilst you think about the questions and what they might be. Okay, let's take a look. So, the Nepalese earthquake happened in 2015. It is an LIC. It's 109th in the list. The magnitude was 7.9 on the Richter scale. 9,000 people sadly died, with 20,000 injured. The cost was lower than the Chilean earthquake at $5 billion. However, the impact may have been more because of the status and the wealth of the country. 19 people died in a subsequent avalanche at Mount Everest. Well done. Let's take a look at the immediate responses compared to the long-term responses. In the Chilean earthquake, there was a swift response from the emergency services. Remarkably, all the roads were repaired within 24 hours and most power was back within 10 days. Over 30,000 emergency wooden shelters were provided. In Nepal, the immediate responses were Oxfam and non-governmental organisations came to the rescue to try to help people in the aftermath. Search and rescue teams were implemented to try to find as many people before they became more seriously injured. 300,000 people migrated away from the area. Let's take a look at the longer term responses. Chile did not need financial or foreign aid. The government said that they'd be able to reconstruct the area within 4 to 6 years, and that's taken place now. In Nepal, however, roads were repaired and landslides were cleared, and there was an international conference to seek support from countries outside of Nepal. Let's take a look at a bigger answer. How would you structure a response to the question, evaluate whether immediate or long-term responses are most effective? Pause the video here and write down this question and we'll work on it together. So let's take a look at that question again. Evaluate whether immediate or long-term responses are most effective. Start off by making a decision. I believe immediate responses are most important because, for example, in Chile in 2010, and then talk about the immediate responses. Then you could talk about the immediate responses in Nepal. After each response, you need to say something along the lines of, this happened, which meant that. That makes sure that you are explaining. However, you need to recognise that long-term responses are important. So talk about the long-term responses in Chile and Nepal. Try to reach a conclusion which acknowledges that both long-term and immediate responses are important. Long-term responses help with the economic outcomes of a country. However, maybe state that in your opinion, the initial saving of life is more important than the wealth and economic stability of a country. There's a little warning at the bottom here, and it says, when revising, answer big questions like this. Give yourself a 10-minute limit. Check you include key geographical terms. If you don't practice them, you're not going to be able to wing it on the day. Maybe stop now and spend 10 minutes putting an answer together for that question, going back through the video if need be. A question on natural hazards might well ask us to consider how we can mitigate the impacts of a natural disaster or a natural hazard. That word mitigate came up a few years ago and confused many of the students. It means to reduce, to lessen the impact. So whenever you see the word mitigate, think to yourself, how could they monitor an earthquake or a volcanic activity? How can they predict? How can we protect? And how can we plan? So let's take a look. With regards to monitoring volcanoes, for example, we can use remote sensing, seismographs and laser beams to see any activity. With regards to earthquakes, we monitor microquakes. We look for bulging of the ground and we identify if there's raised water levels. With prediction, we can sometimes monitor volcanoes and make predictions as to when and how frequently they are likely to erupt. It's really difficult to do this with earthquakes, but we can determine probability as to when an earthquake may or may not happen. Protection is important. With regards to volcanoes, we can use earth embankments or explosives to reroute the lava flow. With regards to earthquakes, we can have earthquake drills to help alert people. Planning is essential to reduce the impact on life of natural disasters. Planning risk assessments and practicing evacuations in peacetime situation is well worth the investment. With regards to earthquakes, you can do risk assessments and hazard maps to identify the areas most likely to be affected. This is the final slide on tectonic hazards, and it is a revision card on the Chilean versus the Nepalese earthquakes. Pause in a moment and take time to make your own revision card on the Chilean and Nepalese earthquakes. My name's Mrs. Wingham and you've been listening to Geography Rocks.